When I was a little girl, people used to tell me I could be anything. An astronaut, a pop star, maybe even the next Steve Jobs. But somewhere in between, you can be anything, and you can be anything except something changes. We go from being celebrated for our confidence to being cautioned for it. The same boldness, curiosity, and ambition that were once praised at age 8 somehow become too much by the time we're 18. The world celebrates girls until we grow up. When we're younger, we're told to speak up and dream big. Classrooms reward that. Raised hands, gold stars, participation grades. But as the Atlantic's Confidence Gap study found, a girl's confidence drops by 30% between the ages of 8 and 14, while her competence stays the same, if not improves. So clearly, it's not our ability that changes, it's the world's response to it. And I felt that shift firsthand. When I was 14, I came up with what would become Drizzle, a smart irrigation system that uses underground sensors and the corresponding software to save water and money worldwide. The idea stemmed from a family trip to India in 7th grade, where I witnessed water inequality for the first time in my life. Now, although I knew I wouldn't be able to solve the entire water crisis at 14, I had a bit of an aha moment when I returned to school in Illinois and saw somebody with their sprinklers on in the rain. Comparing these opposing realities across the globe, I created the first prototype of the smart sprinkler system for my middle school science fair that year. The idea was a hit, and I continued to move on to local, state, and even national science fairs, earning honors and recognitions from some of the largest organizations in the world. The story was perfect. A teenage girl invents something to save the world. It fit the headline template: just enough girl, just enough genius. And over time, I started to take this encouragement less like a compliment and more like direction, starting to build Drizzle all throughout high school, and even graduating a year early to go full-time on my venture in place of my senior year. But now suddenly, the same people who told me I can do anything started telling me, maybe you should slow down. And the same people who once praised me for being so ambitious started questioning if I was a little bit overcommitted. And that's when it hit me. The world claps for girls with ideas, but starts to get a little bit quieter when we start actually executing them. Fast forward to today, I'm 21 years old, and Drizzle has officially transformed from a project to a product, being patent pending, recognized by companies like Google, NASA, Forbes Ignite, and the US Navy, and scaling and generating revenue in the residential, commercial, and agricultural spaces. And I can't lie. Breaking into rooms that I never thought I would break into has been one of the most incredible feelings. But here's what no one tells you about breaking those ceilings. It's not the glass that cuts you. It's the silence that follows after you do so. Because when you're the only girl in the room, every move you make echoes just a little bit louder. Girls like me don't just represent ourselves, we somehow become a spokesperson for 50% of the human population. We start to notice that questions meant to be about our work slowly start becoming questions meant to be about our worth. For example, when I was 14, people asked how I built my prototype. At 16, they started to ask who built it for me. And at my very first pitch competition, a judge asked me if I considered changing my name to something a little bit more westernized so I'd be taken seriously in the business world. I nodded and smiled politely the way that girls are taught to do when something feels off, but you probably shouldn't call it out. But on the inside, it stung. Not because I questioned my abilities, but because in that moment, I realized that your brilliance isn't always the first thing that people see about you. Sometimes it's your name or the way that you look. And it didn't even stop there. In a meeting, a potential investor once asked me when I planned on getting married and having children. When I asked why that was relevant to the business, he followed up with, because you wouldn't be able to handle both. I was 17. And that is the shift that nobody talks about. the point where our confidence actually goes from being celebrated to being contained. And it's not always intentional or hostile. Sometimes it's subtle, the way that someone says, "You're really well spoken," like it's a surprise. So, I did what most women and minorities do when we get frustrated by systems. I joined every single empowerment group I could find. Women in STEM panels, Slack channels, mentorship groups, you name it, and I was probably in it. And don't get me wrong, those programs were life-changing, supportive, necessary, gave me the community, the mentors, and the momentum to be standing in front of all of you today. But over time, something about them slightly started to bother me. Because while the support woman movement is essential, it sometimes creates its own paradox. As through these movements, we're not being integrated, we're being exceptionalized. We celebrate women in leadership by turning them into speaker panels instead of just the default and the norm. We talk about women in tech as if it's a niche and not 50% of the population. The problem isn't the intention, it's the architecture. Because every time we create a new room for inclusion, we still reaffirm that the main one wasn't built for us. Even the way that we speak reflects this. We say female founder or woman in tech, but I've never heard anyone say male founder or men in tech. These labels might seem harmless, but over time, they shape our perception. In linguistics, the Prague School calls this the Markness principle, where the marked term, like female founder, signals a deviation from the norm. And then the unmarked term, just founder, signals what that norm actually is. So even in progress, we're still subtly reinforcing who belongs at the center. Again, this isn't criticism of these programs. They've opened doors for me that I might have never reached on my own. I'm here today in part because of the woman that trailblazed these spaces when nobody else would. But my point is, these programs cannot be the finish line. Because as I've learned, empowerment can raise individuals, but only redesign can change institutions. So here's my hot take. Progress isn't about adding diversity on top of old systems. It's about rewriting that architecture of assumption. Because as we're discussing, bias doesn't live in bad people. It lives in defaults. The default image of a founder, the default image of a leader, the default definition of professionalism. And these defaults aren't neutral, they're inherited. Why don't we all put it to the test for a minute? If everyone could go ahead and please close your eyes, I'd like to ask you to think about, in your opinion, who do you consider to be the top 3 business leaders in America today? Go ahead, visualize them. Who comes to mind first? All right, open your eyes. I'd be willing to bet that more than half of you thought of people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, maybe even Mark Cuban. And don't get me wrong, those answers 1,000% make sense. They've transformed industries and been catalysts in shaping the world as we know it today. But what about people like Whitney Wolfe Herd, who turned Bumble into a billion-dollar company before the age of 30? Or Sarah Blakely, who turned $5,000 into the global empire that we know as Spanx today. If these women didn't come to mind right away, that's not your fault. That's your conditioning. And when we look deeper, we see it everywhere. A 2023 Forbes study found that just 2% of US venture capital funding goes to companies solely founded by women. And companies solely founded by those of underrepresented racial groups receive less than 1% combined. Now, this isn't a pipeline problem. It's a pattern recognition problem. Because investors fund either what feels familiar or create woman or minority-focused investment funds, further feeding into that Markness principle problem. Personally, I would want an investor to invest in Drizzle because they believe that the product is truly transformative. And the fact that I'm a young Indian American woman is the cherry on top with the unique perspectives I can bring. The corporate world mirrors the same biases as well. The average meeting room temperature is set for the metabolic rate of a 154-pound man, meaning that women have quite literally been freezing in rooms that weren't designed for them. When a man and woman deliver identical pitches in a meeting, the man is 68% more likely to get approved or funded by his boss than the woman, solely because men's presentations are judged on potential reward, while women, perceived risk. Communication norms mirror this as well. When men and women in leadership send identical emails, a woman is twice as likely to be reprimanded for her tone, even when the phrasing is exactly the same. In short, assertiveness is viewed as confidence on one end of the table, but aggression on the other. So if this bias truly lives in our infrastructure, then redesign must also start where infrastructure begins, classrooms. In her 2016 TED Talk, Teach Girls Bravery, Not Perfection, founder of Girls Who Code, Reshma Saujani said, "We teach our boys bravery, but we teach our girls perfection." And that line hit me like a mirror. She talks about how boys are just rewarded for trying, failing, and trying again, whereas girls, we're rewarded for things like coloring inside the lines and presentable handwriting. Teachers will often comfort girls who hesitate to answer in class, whereas their male counterparts are encouraged to just go for it. Over time, these patterns start to compound, and by middle school, girls are dropping out of advanced subjects like math or computer science. Not because they lack the ability to succeed in them, but because they've internalized a fear of not being perfect on the first try. So how do we actually redesign an infrastructure that teaches risk-taking just as much as perfection? Well, imagine a classroom where you weren't graded on just what you got right, but also what you were brave enough to attempt. If mistakes were treated as proof of curiosity and proof of effort. Countries like Finland have already started to adopt this mindset, shifting their national curriculum to an inquiry-based one, where experimentation is seen just as highly as accuracy. And within just 5 years, the gender gap in STEM self-confidence has nearly closed. But what about the rest of us? Those of us who are past this stage, at colleges, in companies, or just other rooms that were built before we existed inside of them. Well, systematic change and personal action don't live too far apart. In fact, I believe there's power in how girls like me can operate in our day-to-day lives to make a real impact. First, stop waiting for readiness. When I built Drizzle at 14, trust me when I tell you I wasn't ready. I didn't have a team, or the funding, or the permission, but what I did have was an incredibly strong belief in myself, a passion for the problem I wanted to solve, and the willingness to start anyways. Stopping waiting for readiness isn't about being reckless. It just means that you should treat permission as something that you earn by doing and not wait to be granted. Because trust me, momentum will teach you way faster than permission ever will. Second, replace competition with collaboration. Competition is one of the quietest tools that systems use today to stay the same. When there's only room for one, the structure never has to change. It just rotates between who gets to be the exception. Collaboration can break that illusion of scarcity. So credit freely, share information loudly, and advocate for and mentor for those who aren't in these rooms yet. And lastly, let's redefine ambition. Ambition doesn't always mean asking for the biggest seat at the table. Sometimes it means creating a new table so good that the old one becomes irrelevant. So stop waiting to be chosen and create something new that can't be ignored. These aren't just motivational quotes, they're system hacks, small acts of engineering that I hope day by day will shift this architecture from the inside out. So, where do we go from here? Well, as my personal entrepreneurial journey has taught me, real change isn't just motivational, it's operational. And the question today isn't whether we believe in diversity and inclusion. The truth is, most of us in this room already do. The real question for today is much simpler, and yet somehow also a lot harder to answer. What defaults are we reverting to in our everyday lives? And how are they quietly baked into the ways that we hire, teach, evaluate, fund, and promote? not because we chose them, but because we inherited them. Because once you start looking for these defaults, you'll see them everywhere. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. So maybe the problem was never that our girls stopped believing that they could be anything. And my vision for the future isn't a world where girls are just taught to be braver. It's a future where bravery is not seen as an anomaly when it comes from unexpected places. It's a future where we don't need special categories to explain why somebody belongs in a room. It's a future where execution is taken seriously the first time it's seen, not after it's translated into something familiar. Ultimately, it's a future when nobody flinches when our girls actually become the pop stars, the astronauts, and the entrepreneurs they always dreamt of becoming. That's the future that I'm working towards because it's the only one that truly works. Thank you.